When you trust someone, truly trust them, it's like building a fortress together. Every shared laugh, every promise, every sacrifice becomes a brick in those walls. And when you find out that person has been chiseling away at the foundation behind your back, the whole thing collapses. That's what it felt like when I first started noticing the cracks in my marriage. Sophia and I had been together for 8 years. I thought I knew her better than anyone else in the world. I mean, I had seen her at her best and her worst. We'd weathered storms together, or so I thought. But looking back, I realized now how blind I was, how much I wanted to believe in the illusion we had created. The truth was staring me in the face long before I ever let myself see it. It started with small things. At first, I didn't even recognize them as warning signs. Sophia had always been open with her phone, leaving it on the counter, tossing it onto the couch without a second thought. But one day, I noticed she was keeping it closer. It became her constant companion, tucked into her pocket or flipped face down on the table. I remember joking, "What? Is work so secretive now that you need to guard your phone?" She laughed, brushed it off, and said, "Just lots of emails. Nothing interesting." I laughed with her, but something about her tone didn't sit right. Then there were the late nights. Sophia had always been ambitious, but suddenly, work became her life. Meetings that ran into dinner, projects that couldn't wait until morning. It all seemed a little too convenient. Still, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I told myself, she's just trying to climb the ladder, make something of herself. Who wouldn't admire that? But admiration turned to suspicion when the inconsistencies started piling up. One evening, Sophia told me she was meeting her friend for coffee. A harmless outing, right? But hours later, I scrolled through social media and saw that same friend posting pictures from a yoga retreat 3 states away. My heart sank. That was the first moment I let the doubt creep in. Where was she? And more importantly, who was she with? The confirmation came in the form of a single, careless mistake. One night, Sophia left her phone on the nightstand while she showered. It lit up with a notification, a message from someone named Victor. The preview wasn't explicit, but it was personal enough to send a chill down my spine. "Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again?" I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. That name, Victor, stuck with me like a splinter. And when I did a little digging, it didn't take long to figure out who he was, her boss. The man she had been talking about for months, the one who inspired her, the one who had been mentoring her career. Suddenly, everything clicked. The late nights, the guarded phone, the vague excuses. It all pointed to him. I thought I would confront her right then and there, demand an explanation, yell, cry, something. But instead, I froze. My mind raced, not with anger, but with strategy. Divorce? That seemed too easy, too clean. I didn't want to just walk away. No, I wanted her to feel the betrayal, the humiliation, the emptiness she had inflicted on me. Divorce would be the end, but I needed a middle, a reckoning. The real confirmation came a few days later, though. I told Sophia I had a late meeting and wouldn't be home for dinner. Instead, I followed her. I hated myself for it, hated the sinking feeling in my gut as I watched her walk into a restaurant, her face lighting up as she greeted him. Victor. They sat at a secluded table, leaning in close, laughing, oblivious to the world around them. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. That was what cut the deepest. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to storm in, flip the table, and scream, "How could you?" But the larger part of me, the calculating part, held me back. I knew that a confrontation in the heat of the moment wouldn't give me the satisfaction I craved. I needed time to plan, to turn this betrayal into something she would never forget. I drove home that night, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, hurt, humiliation, they all clawed at me. But underneath it all was a new resolve. This wasn't just about revenge for the sake of revenge. It was about justice, about taking back control of a situation where I had been made to feel powerless. When Sophia came home later that night, she kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened. I smiled back, playing the part of the clueless husband. But inside, I was already preparing for what came next. I wouldn't let her know that I knew. Not yet. That would come later, when it mattered most. For now, I would wait. And when the time was right, I would make sure she felt every ounce of the pain she had caused me. The betrayal had unfolded, yes. But my revenge? That was just beginning. When I decided revenge was my path forward, I knew one thing. This had to be more than a simple confrontation or a dramatic exit. It had to be calculated, methodical, and absolute. I didn't just want Sophia and Victor to face the consequences of their actions. I wanted to dismantle their lives piece by piece, leaving no room for recovery. Revenge, when done right, is not a single act. It's a symphony of strategy, and I was ready to conduct it. The first note of my symphony was Elena, Sophia's best friend. Elena had been in our lives for years, a constant presence at dinners, birthdays, and holidays. She was warm, funny, and, as I had come to realize, always a little too attentive when I was around. There was something in the way she looked at me, a softness that went beyond friendship. I had noticed it before but brushed it off, out of loyalty to Sophia. Now, however, I saw it as an opportunity. Reaching out to Elena wasn't easy. I had to tread carefully. A sudden invitation might raise suspicion, so I waited for the right moment. It came when Sophia mentioned that Elena had been feeling down lately. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. Instead, I sent Elena a message that evening. "Hey, I heard you've been having a rough time. Want to grab a coffee and talk?" She replied almost immediately, agreeing to meet the next day. I chose a quiet cafe, somewhere neither Sophia nor Victor would stumble across us. When Elena arrived, she looked surprised but happy to see me. "This is a nice surprise," she said, her smile warm but curious. I started the conversation lightly, asking about her work and family, easing into the real reason I had called her. Finally, when the moment felt right, I leaned forward and said, "Elena, there's something I need to tell you, and I trust you'll keep it between us." Her brow furrowed, and she nodded. Her curiosity piqued. Then, I told her. I didn't sugarcoat it, but I didn't exaggerate either. I told her about Sophia's affair with Victor, how long it had been going on, and how I had found out. Elena's face went through a range of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, hurt. "I can't believe she would do this to you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "To us." I let that last word hang in the air. It was the opening I needed. "Elena," I said, my voice steady but laced with vulnerability, "I've always valued your friendship. You're someone I can trust. I need your help to get through this, to figure out what to do next." She didn't hesitate. "Of course, Daniel. Whatever you need." From that moment, Elena became my ally. I assured her I would divorce Sophia but asked for patience. "This has to be done carefully," I told her. "I don't just want to leave. I want her to feel the weight of what she's done." Our connection deepened over the following weeks. She confided in me about her frustrations with Sophia, and I leaned into her loyalty and affection. It wasn't hard. Elena had always harbored feelings for me, and now those feelings were surfacing. I didn't push her into anything physical, not yet. This was about trust, about building a bond that would serve my plan when the time came. The second piece of my plan involved Isabel, Victor's younger sister. Unlike her brother, Isabel was intelligent, grounded, and kind. She worked in education, far removed from the high-stakes corporate world Victor thrived in. Isabel had no idea who I was when I introduced myself at a charity event I knew she would attend. Using a fake name and a carefully constructed backstory, I charmed my way into her life. Isabel was refreshingly different from Sophia. She was warm and genuine, untainted by the arrogance that defined her brother. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and within weeks, we were meeting for dinner and drinks. She told me about her strained relationship with Victor, how his domineering personality often overshadowed her. I listened intently, knowing this would only make my eventual reveal all the more satisfying. As our relationship deepened, I began to genuinely enjoy her company. Isabel was everything Victor wasn't: kind, empathetic, and unpretentious. Part of me felt guilty for using her as part of my plan, but that guilt was overshadowed by my determination. I reminded myself that she would ultimately understand why I did what I did, or so I hoped. While I worked on Elena and Isabel, I dedicated every spare moment to gathering evidence against Sophia and Victor. I started by collecting everything I could from Sophia's phone: texts, emails, and photos. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of their affair, but it wasn't enough. I needed something more substantial. Using contacts in the tech industry, I managed to access Victor's financial records. What I found was a treasure trove of incriminating details. He had been using company funds to finance his affair with Sophia: lavish dinners, weekend getaways, even jewelry. I compiled everything into a neatly organized file, knowing this would be my trump card when the time came. As I dug deeper, I uncovered more about Victor's business practices. It turned out he wasn't just unethical in his personal life. His professional life was riddled with corruption. Shady deals, embezzlement, and questionable partnerships were all documented. I didn't just want to ruin him personally. I wanted to destroy his career and reputation as well. By the time I was done, I had everything I needed. The affair, the misuse of company funds, the corruption. It was all laid out, ready to be deployed at the perfect moment. Every piece of evidence was a weapon in my arsenal, and I was ready to use them. With all the pieces in place, I felt an eerie sense of calm. Sophia and Victor had no idea what was coming, and I was content to let them continue their charade a little longer. The longer they believed they were in control, the more satisfying their downfall would be. I didn't just want revenge, I wanted devastation. And when the time was right, I would deliver it with precision. This wasn't just about making them pay. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and my life. The day Victor stormed into my office, I knew the moment had arrived. The crescendo of my carefully orchestrated plan was about to play out, and I was ready. When my secretary buzzed me to say there was a furious gentleman demanding to see me immediately, I almost smiled. It was all going exactly as I'd anticipated. I told her to let him in. The door slammed open, and there he was, Victor. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of arrogance that seemed to precede him everywhere he went. He looked as though he had already won a battle no one else knew was taking place. He walked in like a predator, a man who thrived on intimidation. His voice was sharp, loud, and dripping with derision as he said, "Daniel, I think it's time we had a man-to-man talk." I leaned back in my chair, feigning mild surprise. "Victor," I said, keeping my tone light, "to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "Don't play dumb," he snapped, pointing a finger at me like a judge passing sentence. "You know exactly why I'm here. Let's cut the crap. Sophia is mine. She's been mine for months now. She deserves better than a weak, pathetic excuse for a husband like you. You're nothing but a cuckold. And it's time you did the decent thing and handed her over." The venom in his words was palpable, but I didn't flinch. I kept my expression neutral, almost bored, as he continued his tirade. He went on about how Sophia had chosen him, how she was wasting her life with me, and how I was too blind and spineless to see it coming. His arrogance filled the room like a toxic fog, but I let him talk. The longer he ranted, the more he unraveled, exposing himself for the narcissist he truly was. When he paused, expecting a reaction, I simply folded my hands on the desk and said, "Are you finished?" His nostrils flared, and he leaned forward, planting his hands on my desk. "You think you're clever, don't you? Sitting here pretending to be calm. But we both know you've already lost. Sophia doesn't love you. She's only staying out of pity. So why don't you save yourself the embarrassment and let her go?" I didn't respond immediately. I just looked at him, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then, as if on cue, the door to my private restroom creaked open. Both of us turned to look, and out stepped Isabel, adjusting her skirt and brushing her hair back into place. Victor's smug expression froze, replaced by a look of pure shock. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Isabel looked at him, her face a mixture of confusion and guilt. "Victor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. "Oh, you two haven't met under these circumstances, have you?" I said, feigning surprise. "Victor, this is Isabel, your sister. Isabel, this is Victor, your brother." Victor's face turned a deep shade of red as the pieces fell into place. "What? What the hell is going on here? He stammered, his voice rising. Isabel and I have been seeing each other, I said, keeping my tone deliberately casual. She's been wonderful company these past few months. You never told me your sister was so charming. Victor's fury boiled over. He lunged across the desk, his hand raised to strike me. But I was ready. I caught his wrist midair and twisted it sharply. There was a sickening crack as his fingers bent in ways they weren't meant to. He cried out in pain, stumbling backward. In his flailing, he tripped over the edge of a chair and went down hard, landing awkwardly on his ankle. His howl of pain echoed through the office. Isabel screamed, rushing to her brother's side, but I stayed seated, watching him writhe on the floor. You shouldn't have come here, Victor, I said calmly. You walked into my office, insulted me, and tried to attack me. Did you really think that would end well? My secretary appeared in the doorway, wide-eyed and panicked. Should I call an ambulance? She asked. Please do, I said with a nod. Our guest seems to have injured himself. Victor glared up at me, his face twisted in pain and rage. This isn't over, he spat. You think you've won? You're nothing. Sophia. We'll never see you the same way again, I interrupted. Oh, and by the way, I've been compiling some very interesting information about your business practices. Let's just say your position at the top is looking precarious. The paramedics arrived shortly after, wheeling Victor out of the office on a stretcher. His humiliation was complete. My employees watched in stunned silence as their CEO's wife's lover, and his own sister's partner, was escorted out like a broken man. The whispers started immediately, and I didn't need to say a word to fuel the gossip. As Victor was loaded into the ambulance, I caught Isabel's eye. She looked devastated, torn between her loyalty to her brother and the reality of what she had just witnessed. I gave her a small, almost apologetic smile, knowing she would need time to process everything. But I didn't dwell on it. This was just one piece of my plan. Victor's public humiliation was the first domino to fall, and now that it had, the rest of my revenge would unfold exactly as I had planned. Sophia's time was coming, and she had no idea the storm that was about to hit. When I got home that evening, I knew it was only a matter of time before Sophia confronted me. Victor, being the arrogant fool he was, wouldn't stay silent about what had happened at my office. He couldn't handle defeat, especially one so public and humiliating. Sure enough, I barely had time to set my keys down before I heard the unmistakable sound of Sophia's footsteps storming down the hallway. "Daniel!" she shouted, her voice sharp and trembling with rage. "What the hell did you do to Victor?" I turned to face her, keeping my expression calm and unreadable. "Hello to you too, Sophia," I said. "Rough day?" Her face was a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Don't play coy with me. Victor told me everything. You humiliated him, attacked him. She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "You've ruined everything." "Ruined everything?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's interesting coming from you, Sophia. Care to elaborate on what exactly I've ruined?" Her anger flared again. "You know exactly what I mean. You had no right to treat him that way. Victor is your lover?" I finished for her, my tone sharp enough to cut through her tirade. "The man you've been sneaking around with for months?" The man who walked into my office called me a cuckold and demanded I hand you over like some kind of property? That Victor? Sophia froze, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't decide whether to defend herself or attack me. Finally, she settled on deflection. "You're overreacting," she said, though her voice wavered. "This isn't how adults handle things. You've made a fool of yourself and me. Do you have any idea how this will affect my life?" I couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't a loud or mocking laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes from sheer disbelief. "Your life?" I said, shaking my head. "Sophia, you destroyed our marriage the moment you decided to cheat. You didn't think about me, or our life, or the consequences. So don't stand there and talk to me about how this affects your life." Her face crumpled for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure, her anger simmering beneath the surface. "You're not perfect either, Daniel," she shot back. "Don't act like you've been some saint in this marriage." I tilted my head, watching her closely. You're right, Sophia. I'm not perfect. But let me show you just how imperfect I can be. Without waiting for her response, I walked to the front door and opened it. Standing there, calm and composed, was Elena. She looked radiant, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. Sophia's eyes darted between us, her confusion quickly turning to horror. "Elena," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you? What's going on?" "Elena is my fiancée," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "And as you can see, we're expecting a child." The color drained from Sophia's face. "You're lying," she said, shaking her head. This isn't real. Elena, tell me this isn't real." Elena, to her credit, held her ground. "I'm sorry, Sophia," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "You don't deserve an explanation, but I'll give you one anyway. Daniel came to me after he found out what you were doing with Victor. He didn't want to confront you right away because he wanted to handle this with dignity. Something you clearly don't understand." Sophia looked at me, her eyes wide with betrayal. "You manipulated her," she said, her voice trembling. "You used her to hurt me." "No, Sophia," I said, my voice cold. "You did this to yourself. Elena didn't betray you. I did. But only after you betrayed me first. And let's not forget Victor, who promised you the world while using you as his personal plaything." Sophia's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down her face as she shouted, "You're a monster, Daniel. You've destroyed everything." "I'm not done yet," I said calmly. From my pocket, I pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. "These are divorce papers. Everything has been arranged. The house is mine, the assets are frozen, and you'll get nothing. Not a penny." Sophia stared at the papers as though they were a venomous snake. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I've given you years of my life. You can't just throw me out like this." "Oh, but I can," I said, my voice steely. "You see, I've been documenting everything. Your affair with Victor, his misuse of company funds, even the gifts he gave you. I've also made sure his business dealings are under review. By the time I'm done, Victor won't have a business to run, and you won't have him to run to." Sophia looked like she might collapse. You've planned this from the beginning," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "Yes," I admitted, "because divorcing you quietly would have been too easy. You didn't just cheat on me, Sophia. You humiliated me, mocked me, and lied to me. And I couldn't let that go unanswered." Elena stepped closer to me, her presence a silent statement of support. "You should leave now, Sophia," I said. "Take what little dignity you have left and get out." Sophia didn't move at first. She just stood there, her shoulders shaking as she cried silently. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out the door. The finality of it was palpable. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and, surprisingly, a twinge of sadness. But I pushed it aside. The chapter with Sophia was over, and I had no intention of looking back. Elena touched my arm gently, her eyes full of understanding. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I nodded. "I will be," I said. "This is the life I want now. With you. For us." As I stood there with Elena, I realized that while revenge had driven me, it wasn't what defined me. I had taken back control of my life, and now I had a chance to build something real, something better. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The aftermath of everything hit Sophia harder than even I had expected. In a matter of weeks, her entire life unraveled. She went from the seemingly poised and confident woman she had been to someone desperately trying to pick up the shattered pieces of her existence. It started with her eviction. I had given her no choice but to leave the house, and she had no assets or savings to fall back on. Her affair with Victor had cost her more than just her marriage. It had drained her financially. She'd relied on Victor's promises of a future filled with luxury and security, but when he found himself at the center of his own collapse, those promises evaporated like smoke. For a few days, she tried to stay with friends, but the sympathy she might have expected wasn't there. Word of her betrayal had spread quickly, thanks to whispers from our shared social circles, and, undoubtedly, Victor's public humiliation. People love to gossip, and Sophia's fall from grace was the kind of story that spread like wildfire. Friends who had once admired her now avoided her, unwilling to align themselves with someone branded as deceitful and selfish. I later learned that she had moved into a dingy motel on the outskirts of town, a far cry from the life she had grown accustomed to. It wasn't long before she tried to reach out to me. I changed my number, but she managed to send an email. It was long, rambling, and filled with a mix of apologies, accusations, and desperate pleas. She blamed Victor, blamed herself, and even blamed me in the same breath. She begged me for a second chance, claimed she had made a mistake, and promised to fix everything if I would only let her come home. I didn't reply. Her descent continued when she lost her job. Victor's downfall had rippled through the company, and those connected to him bore the brunt of the consequences. Sophia's role, already compromised by her personal entanglement with him, was deemed expendable when the company began its restructuring. No one stepped in to defend her. In fact, many colleagues had suspected her affair with Victor long before it became public. She left in disgrace, her reputation tarnished beyond repair. With no job, no money, and nowhere to turn, Sophia tried to rebuild. She reached out to her family, but even they were hesitant to help. Her parents, deeply disappointed by her actions, offered her only minimal support, unwilling to condone the choices that had led her to this point. They urged her to reflect, to take responsibility, but Sophia wasn't ready to face the full weight of her mistakes. As weeks turned into months, her isolation grew. She drifted from one temporary job to another, barely making enough to scrape by. The once vibrant woman who had commanded attention in every room now seemed a shadow of herself, weighed down by regret and the judgment of others. The irony was bitter. She had sacrificed everything for a man who had promised her the world, only to end up with nothing. Victor's fall was even more dramatic. After the incident at my office, his reputation took a nosedive. I had made sure the evidence of his misdeeds, both personal and professional, was strategically shared with the right people. Key stakeholders in his company, including board members and investors, were made aware of his embezzlement and unethical practices. The media picked up on the story, and soon Victor's name was splashed across headlines as an example of corporate greed and corruption. Within weeks, he was forced to resign under immense pressure. His departure didn't come quietly, either. Employees who had suffered under his arrogance and exploitation came forward with their stories, painting a picture of a man who had used his power to manipulate and intimidate. The company, desperate to salvage its reputation, distanced itself from Victor entirely, publicly denouncing his actions and promising reform. Victor's personal life was no better. His family, including Isabel, turned their backs on him. For Isabel, it was a betrayal on multiple levels. She had admired her brother, despite his flaws, and his downfall shattered the pedestal she had placed him on. Learning of his affair with Sophia, and seeing firsthand the chaos it had caused, was the final blow. Victor, stripped of his power and influence, tried to retreat into the shadows, but the damage was done. His finances were in ruins after legal battles and settlements drained what remained of his wealth. He attempted to reach out to former allies, but no one wanted to be associated with him. He became a pariah, his name synonymous with disgrace. I knew it was only a matter of time before Isabel confronted me. She had been distant since the incident at my office, and I could tell she was struggling to process everything. When she finally called and asked to meet, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, and as soon as she sat down, I could see the hurt in her eyes. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling, "I need you to explain everything." I didn't try to dodge her questions. I told her the truth about Sophia's affair, Victor's involvement, and my decision to expose them both. I admitted to seeking her out deliberately, knowing she was Victor's sister, and using our relationship as part of my plan. As I spoke, I watched her expression shift from anger to sadness to something I couldn't quite place. "You used me," she said finally, her voice heavy with emotion. "You played with my feelings to get back at him." "I did," I said, meeting her gaze. "And for that, I'm sorry. But Isabel, you need to understand, I wasn't just trying to hurt Victor. I was taking back control of my life. He destroyed my marriage, humiliated me, and thought he could walk away without consequences. She was silent for a long moment. "I believed in you," she said quietly. "I thought what we had was real." "It was," I said, and I meant it. "At least, it became real." "I didn't plan for that, Isabel. And I didn't plan for you to be the one person who made me question whether revenge was worth it." But by the time I realized that, it was too late. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "You got what you wanted, Daniel. You destroyed him, but you also destroyed us." I couldn't argue with that. I had used her, and in doing so, I had hurt someone who didn't deserve it. "I'm sorry," I said again. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know the truth." Isabel stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said, her voice steady, "but I hope you find what you're looking for, whatever it is." She walked away, and I didn't try to stop her. Watching her leave was harder than I'd expected, but I knew it was the price I had to pay. My revenge was complete, but it had come at a cost. Isabel's forgiveness wasn't something I could demand. It was something I would have to live without. Sophia and Victor were both shadows of their former selves, their lives stripped of the power and privilege they had taken for granted. They had betrayed and hurt others for their own selfish desires, and now they were left to face the consequences alone. As for me, I had one. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. I had taken back my life, but I was no longer the same man who had stood on the other side of this journey. I had changed, for better or worse, and now it was time to figure out what came next. Starting over felt surreal. After months of turmoil, betrayal, and calculated revenge, the idea of a peaceful, stable life seemed almost foreign. But with Elena by my side, the pieces of my shattered world began to fit together again. Not as they once were, but into something new, something better. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. Elena and I moved in together shortly after Sophia's departure. It wasn't rushed or impulsive. It was the natural progression of a relationship that had grown from shared pain and mutual respect into genuine love. Living with her was unlike anything I had experienced with Sophia. There was no pretense, no games, no unspoken resentments simmering beneath the surface. Elena was open, honest, and unwaveringly supportive. She didn't just accept my flaws, she embraced them, reminding me daily that I was worthy of love, even after everything I had been through. Our home was filled with warmth and laughter, a stark contrast to the cold, tension-filled house I had shared with Sophia in those final years. Elena brought life back into the spaces that had once felt empty. She had a knack for turning even the simplest moments into something special, cooking breakfast together, decorating the nursery, or spending quiet evenings on the couch, her hand resting on her growing belly. These small, everyday moments became the foundation of our new life, and I cherished them more than I ever thought possible. As her pregnancy progressed, Elena's excitement was infectious. She'd spend hours researching baby names, browsing through parenting books, and planning for the future. Her joy was unshakable, even on the days when her feet ached and she could barely move without waddling. Watching her, I realized just how much she had given me. Not just her love, but a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't simply starting over. I was building something meaningful, something I could be proud of. Elena's unwavering loyalty also gave me the strength to let go of the bitterness that had consumed me for so long. She never judged me for the choices I had made, even when I confided in her about the darker moments of my revenge. Instead, she helped me see that those choices, while necessary at the time, didn't define who I was. "You're more than what happened to you," she told me one night as we lay in bed. "And you're more than the man who fought back. You're a father, a partner, and a good man. Don't forget that." Her words stayed with me, echoing in my mind whenever doubt tried to creep in. She was right. My life wasn't defined by the betrayal or the revenge. It was defined by what I chose to do next, and with Elena and our unborn child by my side, I knew I had everything I needed to create a better future. With the chaos of the past behind me, I found myself reflecting often on the journey that had brought me here. There were moments when I questioned whether I had gone too far, whether the revenge I had sought had crossed the line from justice into cruelty. But as I sifted through those thoughts, I realized that I didn't regret my choices, not entirely. Revenge, for all its darkness, had given me something I hadn't felt in years: control. Sophia and Victor had stripped me of my dignity, my trust, and my sense of self. Taking that control back, in whatever form I could, had been necessary for my healing. But what surprised me was how much it had also taught me about myself. For one, I learned that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. The betrayal had broken me, yes, but it hadn't destroyed me. I had faced the pain head-on, navigated the storm, and come out the other side, not unscathed, but intact. That strength, forged in the fire of everything I had endured, was something I now carried with me into every aspect of my life. I also learned the value of authenticity. My relationship with Sophia had been riddled with illusions of happiness, of trust, of love. I had spent years pretending everything was fine, ignoring the cracks in our foundation because I was too afraid to face the truth. With Elena, there was no need for pretenses. She saw me for who I was, flaws and all, and loved me anyway. That kind of honesty was liberating, and I vowed never to settle for anything less in any area of my life. One night, as I sat alone in the nursery, assembling a crib for our baby, I thought about the legacy I wanted to leave for my child. What kind of father did I want to be? What lessons did I want to impart? The answer was simple. I wanted to teach them to value integrity, to stand up for themselves, and to never let the actions of others define their worth. But more than anything, I wanted to show them that it was possible to rebuild, to rise from the ashes of pain and create something beautiful. Letting go of the past wasn't easy. There were days when the memories would resurface: Sophia's lies, Victor's arrogance, the humiliation I had endured. But each time, I reminded myself of how far I had come. Those memories were just that, memories. They no longer had the power to hurt me unless I allowed them to. I also thought often about Isabel. Her confrontation had been a sobering reminder that my revenge, while satisfying, hadn't been without collateral damage. I regretted hurting her, even if it had been unintentional. But I hoped that, in time, she would find peace and perhaps even understand why I had done what I did. Life had a way of surprising us, and I held on to the hope that our paths might cross again under better circumstances. As the months passed, I began to notice something unexpected: peace. It wasn't the dramatic, triumphant kind of peace you see in movies. It was quiet, subtle, and steady. It came in the form of Elena's laughter, the sound of our baby's heartbeat during an ultrasound, and the simple joy of a sunny afternoon spent walking in the park. It was a peace I hadn't thought I'd ever feel again, and it reminded me that life, even after everything, still had so much to offer. The birth of our child was the final chapter in my journey of renewal. Holding my son for the first time was a moment of pure, unfiltered joy. As I looked into his tiny, innocent face, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me, not just for him, but for everything that had brought me to this point. The pain, the betrayal, the revenge, it had all led me here, to this moment. And for that, I was thankful. In the end, my new life wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was built on love, honesty, and a hard-won sense of self. And as I stood in the nursery, rocking my son to sleep while Elena rested nearby, I realized that I had finally found what I had been searching for all along: peace, purpose, and the freedom to move forward. The past was behind me. The future was mine to create. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it.